Okay, our next set of panelists are in place and ready to go if we are. And the title of this session is Broader Impacts from a Broader Perspective. So we're kind of moving up from some of the boots on the ground to some of the leaders at NSF here. And on my left, and I better make sure, this is John. No. Okay, first on my left is a UW-Madison grad, David Blockstein. In the middle is John Wingfield, and on the end is Pramod Khargonekar, NSF directors, assistant directors, whatever their titles are, they will inform you. So again, the session will be discussion, some PowerPoint, and then Q&A with lots of discussion up until about 11. So we have roughly an hour and a half. Okay? I will turn it over to David. Or John, whoever wants to go first. You're first.
Okay, thank you. If I can just close that temporarily. Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is John Wingfield. I'm the Assistant Director for Biological Sciences. Usually when I say that, the first question I get is, who's the director? Well, it is a little confusing that we have, obviously, the director of the foundation, Dr. Cordova, that you heard from yesterday, and Deputy Director, Dr. Cora Marrett. And then there are 7 assistant directors. Each one runs one of the directorates. So that's how it works out roughly. I'm also a professor at the University of California in Davis. I will be returning there in September. It's hard to believe my four-year term is almost over. But the point I'm trying to make there is that I also have my own lab. I've had a lot of funding from the NSF, and I'm very familiar with broader impacts, having written many myself and participated. So it's interesting to see the other end now at NSF. And since I've been here at NSF, I've visited a lot of panels in biological sciences and some outside of biology, and also been to a lot of institutions where I've given talks about NSF and biological sciences at NSF. And as I'm sure you can imagine, I get a lot of questions about broader impacts. What are they? How to assess them, coordination of broader impacts. These are all things that I know concern you very deeply. And I'm really delighted to see, I think all of us are delighted to see this broader impacts network developing and the research coordination network. I think this is exactly what has been needed to bring together all of the communities and the institutions to really move forward with broader impacts on a national scale and move the needle in many regards. And so I'm very interested to hear questions from you about how you see this evolving. Biology, as all the directorates here at NSF, are very committed to education and public outreach. Education from mostly undergraduate and graduate, but also down to high school level and below. Particularly also public outreach. I've always felt that we could do a much better job. I think Dr. Cordova yesterday talked about relevance. I think that is critical, and one of the things we've been talking about in bio is developing courses for non-majors that would be relevant to their lives, biology relevant to their lives, pollution, population, evolution, climate change, and so forth. There's a lot that can be done at many different levels. But I think one thing we must also bear in mind, that relevance is certainly critical, but there's a lot of science that we fund at NSF that may not have obvious relevance at first. And that's where we at NSF get dinged by members of Congress, but also other public institutions and the public at large. So that's something that is very critical for broader impacts, is that we can ultimately explain relevance, even though particular projects may seem frivolous, outrageous, and a waste of money. Finally, I'd just like to point out one other aspect of broader impacts that I think is really exciting, and that is citizen science. It is a very effective way of disseminating knowledge while members of the public actually contribute to the scientific research endeavor. That, I think, is relevance in a very different way, that members of the public can actually feel part of pushing back frontiers in research. And certainly within the biological sciences and other sciences and engineering, I think that this is growing very, very rapidly, and actually had its origins in many respects in broader impacts. So I think that this is one very exciting development. And one thing it's also important to bear in mind with citizen science is that with 15,000, 20,000 members of the public at large collecting data, they can do things that for the larger research endeavor that technology cannot do right now. And for biology, that is having boots on the ground, actually observing things happening with climate change or with the seasons that we just do not have the technology to do. So that just gives you a very broad, very high-level overview of how in the biological sciences and also NSF in general we do regard broader impacts. And I think it is ripe now for a much more coordinated and organized response and a way to move forward in the future to make this even more impactful than it's been so far. So I'll hand over to the next person.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Pramod Khargonekar. I am the Assistant Director for Engineering, and I don't have to explain what Assistant Director means because John did a wonderful job of explaining that to you. I am also a professor at the University of Florida of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and in fact, I took this position just about a year ago. Before coming over, I had 2 active grants from NSF, and so I am pretty well aware of how to write the broader impact section of the proposal, having done that several times. In my role as AD for engineering, I've gone around the nation to various universities talking about engineering at NSF, and particularly the broader impact section for NSF proposals, because that is of great interest to us as well as to the research community that we seek to support. So with that background, what I thought I would do is sort of give you some thoughts on how we are thinking about broader impacts in the engineering directorate and what can be done if we work together. So first, just a word about engineering directorate, because I assume not all of you know about engineering directorate. So we fund basic research in many fields of engineering. We also fund engineering education activities, not a very large sum, but we have programs in engineering education. And we also fund some activities in innovation. So I-Core is our latest and an extremely successful program in the innovation space. So we actually cover all 3 pieces, and we would like to think that these 3 pieces together actually advance the society along important directions. Now, engineering research by its very nature is what you might call use-inspired basic research. So this is the famous Stokes diagram where he classified fundamental research as Bohr-style curiosity-driven basic research or Pasteur-style use-inspired, but yet very fundamental research with broad applicability. So what engineering directorate does for most part, not completely, but certainly a very large fraction of what we support is this use-inspired basic research. And that's the nature of engineering. And therefore, the kind of work we support has very natural impacts on things such as technology advancements, economic competitiveness, health, security, etc., that you would consider to be important broader impacts criteria. And in fact, if you look at the America Competes Act, which is one of the places where BI is put in legislation, if you will, it's certainly, I just read those those things this morning before coming to this meeting, and a lot of the things that are enumerated there are impacted by what we do in engineering research. Our engineering education investments are driven by the recognition that while we have worked very, very hard as a community, as the academic community, on addressing problems in engineering education, we still face them in spades. Issues such as diversity, gender and ethnic diversity bedevils the field and has done so for at least as long as I have been a professor, which is more than 30 years now. Preparation for a globally competitive economy. I mean, are our students ready for that reality and the future that's coming? So those are issues that remain very central to the education component of what we want to achieve. And again, broader impacts aligns very well with those challenges. So having said all this, it would seem as if we really don't have a problem. So what's missing? In a nutshell, here is the issue. A typical engineering grant is $300,000 for 3 years. $100K a year, it typically supports one graduate student and professor, some fraction of summer, which tends to be less and less with every passing year. So how do you move the needle on these large, broader impacts issues? And you can choose any one of them. Take advanced manufacturing, which is a huge priority for the president, for both sides of the aisle, for the engineering directorate. Big problem. We spend, let's say, $80 million in advanced manufacturing. How do we move the needle in advanced manufacturing with the investment that we make? And that investment is typically $300K for 3 years. And that, in a nutshell, is the problem. And to my mind, this audience and the kind of thinking that's going on in this room is absolutely critical to answering this. So my answer revolves around, if you will, 3 keywords: facilitation, leveraging, and coherence. So let me talk about all these 3. Certainly, for a typical professor who is writing his or her grant, anything that can be done to facilitate the broader impacts piece, I think would be tremendous help to the faculty. They may not know it, but it would be tremendous help. So there is a role in facilitation to show creative ways in which the work that they want to do for very important scholarly basic research motivations can couple to broader impact. So that's one. Second is leveraging. We must leverage other players at the table in order to move the needle. Now, what are those other players? Certainly the institution itself. Every institution or academic institution has a strategic plan. Typically, that strategic plan attempts to benefit the stakeholders. Stakeholders typically tend to be people who are paying the bills. It typically happen to be, in case of state institutions, would be local economies, state economies, regional development. There are maybe some thrust areas where there is competitive advantage. So leveraging all those resources, which typically are much greater than the $300K NSF grant, I think is an extremely important piece of this puzzle. In my opinion, that's really underutilized, tremendously underutilized. And we can talk in the discussion session as to what could be done, but I think and I don't mean leveraging just at the institution. You can imagine leveraging with the broader national societies, such as IEEE, ASME. They all have some programs and plans where the work of the faculty member could couple. There could be industrial societies, industrial consortia, where again the leveraging could happen. And so I can imagine multiple ways in which this leveraging should be thought systematically in writing of the proposal and articulating the broader impacts plan of the research that's being done. And finally, coherence. So each PI, when they write their proposal, they write their own vision of broader impacts. And you can think of these as little vectors, that each person is putting a vector in a certain direction, and is the vector sum more than 0? If they're not aligned, you're not going to get a big vector sum. And so this idea of coherence, to do what we can so that 100 NSF projects on a typical university campus are all aligned in some fashion or form so that they're moving the needle together but not necessarily individually. Requires really proactive thinking and making it easy for the faculty members to actually achieve a much larger impact for the work they are doing without overburdening them. Because as it is, they have a pretty busy life. I mean, I have been there, done that, and will go back to that life. So what can we do to make it easy, at the same time not make it routine? I think that the big danger in this thinking would be everything becomes plug and play, routine. Oh, I took cut and paste, 3 paragraphs from here, stuck it here, I'm done. No, I think that would be a big mistake. How do you ensure creativity? How do you ensure novelty? How do you ensure out-of-the-box thinking? Because these problems are really endemic. These problems are really, really hard. If they were easy to solve, they would be solved by now. So being creative, allowing the faculty members to engage creatively into set of structures which allow leveraging facilitation, I think is the ticket. And I think the room for improvement is absolutely stupendous. And I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much.
Morning. We'll see if this wakes up again. Okay, so good morning, everybody. I'm David Blockstein, and I'm not an assistant director of NSF. So this is probably the closest that I'll ever get. I don't even work for NSF, even though it seems like for the last few months I've spent almost as much time at NSF as in my own office, but that's a good thing, actually. So I'm here as a member of the Advisory Committee on Environmental Research and Education. So let me explain why I'm here with the assistant directors talking about this topic. So as you know, NSF is structured actually kind of like a university in a lot of ways, and very traditional disciplinary functions. And coming back to the year 2000, the National Science Board issued a report, Environmental Science and Engineering for the 21st Century, the Role of the National Science Foundation. And it laid out an agenda for an increased investment and also a more of a cross-cutting structure as a way to accomplish that. And so one of the ways to do that, each of the directorates has its own advisory committee, and in preparing for the Science Board report, the NSF staff identified a rather large portfolio of environmental research and education funding, and they needed essentially a group to oversee that portfolio from the external community perspective. And so that's been the role of our advisory committee. We report to the director. We have the pleasure of having all of the assistant directors, as well as Dr. Ward representing the Office of International and Integrative Affairs, to meet with us. And we are trying to both push forward in terms of what kind of agenda we see necessary to serve science and society, and that ties very closely with the broader impacts, and then also to provide oversight to the NSF portfolio. So we've produced 3 reports, as you can see on the bottom, laying out an intellectual framework. One of the things that I want to point out is that our committee has both research and education in the title. And so again, we're somewhat unusual across the foundation in having that role, an integrative role, bringing research and education together. And in fact, the committee members, many of them are representative of the advisory committees of the different directors and then their directorates, and some of us are at-large members. So for us, we've been a broader impacts are us in a certain sense. We've been strong proponents not only of the need, but also trying to articulate what that means and how it can be implemented. So I want to introduce a framework, and this is something that really was articulated by Bruce Logan from Penn State University. Bruce is the current chair of the Advisory Committee for Environmental Research and Education. So a framework for us to be thinking about broader impacts, and then I want to provide actually quite a few examples of projects or approaches that could be met within the framework that's described here. So beginning with the team, who's part of the team, what's the project about, how do you connect the research with education and workforce development, and then going beyond the particulars of the project, the outreach and community impact. So one of the things that we postulate, and I will actually show you some data to document this, is that interdisciplinary approaches, especially to environment and sustainability, do attract women and underrepresented minorities. And so here's a testimonial, human-centered computing lab, and at least this is an impression that the interdisciplinary nature is a reason for attracting this diverse community to working in this lab that is tying people and technology. There are actually some data. Here's work looking at interdisciplinary dissertations and a very large sample size, over 110,000 dissertations, and you can see that with the dissertation topics that women have an 8% greater odds of reporting on interdisciplinary research than men. Stephanie Furman, who's the leader of our working group on diversity within the advisory committee, has actually done some really interesting work to show that if you look at keywords that are associated with disciplinary versus interdisciplinary, that they're also, a lot of the same words can apply to gender differences as well. And so, again, some research that Stephanie has found showing that in terms of citations, and these are in various, I'm not sure the exact source of the citations, but again, that you can see that women in their research citations tend to include many more research fields than men do. If you look within the environmental programs, we've done a survey through the National Council for Science and the Environment. Our Director of Educational Research, Dr. Shirley Vincent, has surveyed the 2,000 interdisciplinary degree programs in environment and sustainability, and what she's found is that in terms of gender, that the programs tend to be more skewed towards women, and also in terms of diversity, that even though it certainly is far from a majority in any degree type of program, but the numbers here being in the teens actually, sadly, are competitive and actually better than many of the disciplinary fields. So an intrinsic attraction to diversity within the field, the interdisciplinary field of environmental and sustainability research and education. There also are programs that are focused on advancing the diversity within these fields. This is one of our own programs through the National Council for Science and the Environment, a program called Environmenters that basically it takes advantage of bringing together qualified mentors, usually at colleges and universities, and high school students, largely from underrepresented populations, and engages them in scientific research to understand an environmental science topic, and then a lot of enrichment activities through mentoring and college preparation so that they are more likely to succeed, that they're more likely to enter college and to go into these fields. I should say, though, that one of the challenges that I think a lot of us working in this area are facing is with the approach at NSF, as the Education Directorate is continually emphasizing education research and, in my mind, de-emphasizing capacity building, that it's hard to maintain these kinds of capacity building programs. You're always having to come up with some sort of a new angle. For example, we had an ITEST grant that supported us for a few years for this program. But if one of the broader impacts really is capacity building, I think that's an issue, and our committee thinks that that's an issue that the foundation really needs to think a little bit more about. The second area in this framework is the broader impacts of the topic itself. And I and our committee do contend that with pretty much everything that is in our domain is intrinsically broader impacts because of the importance of the environmental and sustainability issues to society and to humanity at this point in our existence. NSF has recognized that here's from some of the popular literature, and I don't really need to put this in front of you because you know this. You observe, you see how these issues, and it's not because they're, it's just, I mean, frankly, we would perhaps be happy if they weren't such high profile, because that would indicate that maybe we didn't have such great environmental challenges. But NSF has recognized this through their SEAS portfolio. Larry Weber talked about that a little bit this morning. Note again, science, engineering, and education. So the integration of these components within NSF. And this is, the SEAS portfolio is really all about broader impacts. It's informing societal actions, it's about sustainability, it's broad, it's across the foundation, it has partnerships with other institutions. So that is certainly good news. It's also, I think, broader impacts within the structure, and again, Larry talked a little bit about that in terms of the coastal seas, where the broader impacts are really even beyond the topic, the integration with society, the integration with building capacity are often part of that program. And a good example of that is the SEAS Fellows program, where each year there have been about a dozen or so postdoctoral fellows who are interdisciplinary. Broader impacts is a big part of the application for that, and they're supported by the proposal. Again, I do have to add a negative caveat in the sense that we were informed at our last advisory committee that NSF is ramping down the SEAS portfolio and is preparing to sunset it in fiscal 2017. And so as a committee, we're very concerned about both the sunset and what's going to come next, because we feel that a high-profile program like this has actually been really a beacon to identify the importance of the broader impacts in this area. And I guess I should have put this one up before, but some of the topics that are being addressed within the SEAS portfolio, and these are slides that are borrowed from presentations by NSF staff, I should say. So the third area within the framework is connecting research with education and workforce development. And there have been some comments on this throughout the meeting, but the idea that there's a positive feedback cycle, that by engaging in broader impacts, that one can actually improve your research, that it can sharpen your questions, it can help to provide new insights. And so I just want to give a few examples of that. Wally Broker from the Lamont Doherty Laboratory at Columbia University is one of our leading global change researchers, and he came up with this, was studying ocean circulation, and this is back, I think, in the 70s, was talking with a reporter, or he was working on an article for Scientific American, worked with an illustrator, and the illustrator came up with this concept of the ocean conveyor belt, and that was in the Scientific American article. Dr. Broker points out that actually the illustration wasn't completely accurate, but it's a metaphor that has really captured people's attention, and it's helped to educate people about ocean circulation and the possibility for very rapid climate change. And in fact, it was the logo that was being used for the Interagency Global Change Research Initiative. Another example from our colleague and past ACERE chair, Stephanie Furman of Barnard College. Stephanie works on polar ice, and in one of the public talks that she gave, somebody said, well, are there places, as we know that the Arctic ice is shrinking, are there places where the Arctic ice is being regenerated and developed? And that led her to look at the data again and come up with this idea of an ice shed, a place for regeneration of sea ice, and that is going to be extremely important as we try to look for mitigative approaches to climate change. This is one that I just learned about yesterday from Rick Tankersley, who talked about the Ocean 180 video challenge. This is a case where researchers who have been funded and published were challenged to create a 3-minute video explaining their research, and the videos were not just evaluated by other researchers, because the idea was they're explaining it to the public. And so, as Rick explained to me, they crowdsourced this through thousands of middle school students throughout the world, and the middle school students reviewed these videos, ranked them, and they provided very useful feedback, which then helped the researchers to sharpen their own research questions. So the value of global broader impacts, crowdsourcing from an unexpected source. John mentioned citizen science. He and I are both ornithologists, at least in our original incarnation. So here's an example from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, where they have a project eBird, and I apologize, it's not very clear, but the purple represents sightings of birds of a particular species, and this is a result of thousands of crowdsourced observations. People enter in when and where they see birds, and then you can actually map the range of the species, and you can do this over time and show migration and the passage of populations on the landscape. So citizen science being a way of, again, engaging and integrating education and research. And then the final area of expanding impacts, and I think this is very much consistent with what Pramod was talking about in terms of facilitation and leveraging and coherence, that there are a number of different approaches for building communities of practice, connecting science, connecting research with broader impacts. This is one that we staff, a council of environmental leaders and directors, interdisciplinary leaders of environmental programs. We've been able to use that to create coherence among the field through a combination of getting together, doing research, and really building a shared community that then adds value to each of the attempts. There's also a new professional association in the interdisciplinary environmental space, the Association for Environmental Studies and Sciences. One of the things that was talked about with the broader impacts area is, should there be some sort of a broader impacts journal? Well, one of the key things with this was to create a journal and a professional society to not only enable collaboration, but also to build the credibility of these researchers and educators as they come before tenure and promotion committees. Another project that I'm involved in, this is an NSF-funded project called Integrate. It's a STEM talent expansion program. So I love this because it's an acronym built into an acronym, the STEP program. This is supported through the geoscience program. There's another STEP center called Epicenter that is supported through engineering, and we just actually had a conference call with a couple of the leaders on that earlier this week. This is it's a 5-year, $2 million a year investment from NSF, so this is big stuff. And the goal is to transform teaching and learning about the geosciences, and in the context of connecting geoscience education with the grand challenges facing society. And so through Integrate, we are supporting curriculum development, we're supporting implementation programs where people are using the modules that have been developed and putting them into their own broader curriculum. There are a whole variety of workshops on things from workforce to connecting geosciences with engineering. We're going to be doing one in about a month on teaching about risk and resilience. And then we're going to be doing traveling workshops to bring these programs. And so I think by a big effort like this, that we're maybe able to make that change within a field that can connect with a lot of individual investigator approaches, but the scale really makes it possible, as well as, of course, an excellent team of researchers and educators involved. Another one in terms of infrastructure, this is an NSF grant that our organization has, creating a cyber infrastructure for learning about climate change, CAMEL, Climate Adaptation and Mitigation e-learning. It combines a cyber infrastructure, a website where people can gain content, can share content, both curricular and substantive resources, and then build a community of teaching and learning around that. I also want to mention a number of the people here are involved with the COSI centers, Centers for Ocean Science, Education and Excellence. Again, intrinsically broader impacts by bringing research and education together, and they even have one of the posters here in our virtual poster session highlights this broader impact wizard, where if you're interested in doing a proposal, that you can actually go to this website and learn about broader impacts and how to integrate that. Again, I think an unfortunate footnote is that COSI is also being phased out by NSF. And so those programs are going to be, the centers are going to be scrambling for their own money in different ways. Another approach, I think, on this, and this goes really, I think, to both the leverage and the coherence, is to be partnering with groups like informal science and technology centers, where they have the critical mass and mission to be bringing in, they are bringing in diverse audiences to be learning about science. And so if you're a PI, one way to engage with your broader impacts you could just do a talk at your own institution, and you may or may not get the kind of audience that you are hoping for, or you could do a talk or do a project in connection with the Science and Technology Center, and they know how to do the kind of outreach that many academics don't, and so another way of leveraging. And then finally, to conclude with something that is actually a very new idea, just really articulated in the last month. NSF has this committee on equal opportunities in science and engineering, and so this is about the diversity aspects, and they're recommending, they've seen the power of aggregation of scholarship through the Science and Technology Centers that are supported by NSF, and so this, the CIOS, as they're known, is proposing that there should be centers for diversity that would be specifically competed through NSF, would have relatively large budgets, could be at one or multiple institutions, to consolidate and to expand the kinds of diversity outreach efforts. And so our advisory committee has endorsed that, and we're working with the CIOS committee to hopefully move that idea forward. So I presented a wide range of activities, and I guess the overarching message is broader impacts is really possible. I mean, there's this, I think, this perception that this is something hard and something new. Kevin and I were talking that, you know, those of us who grew up in University of Wisconsin system, there's something called the Wisconsin idea, and that goes back to the progressive era in the early 20th century, that the boundaries of the campus are the boundary of the state, and really it goes well beyond that. But the idea of service to society through scholarship, and so I think in a lot of ways what broader impacts is really applying the Wisconsin idea across the nation. So thank you for your time. Discussion, question.
One of the things that I want to mention is that we are very happy to have Dr. Blockstein and our assistant directors here. I need to point out something special about Dr. Wingfield. He's the assistant director for biosciences, and that is the directorate where our RCN funding is coming from. So we owe a very much debt of gratitude to biosciences.
You wrote a great proposal, so you left us no choice.
All right, I like that. We left you no choice. I like that. You ready for your question? All right, questions?
Yes. This question is for Dr. Khargonekar. Pramod, the question is, technology-based economic development through university-based inventions is a key broader impact. The process is supported by NSF through I-Core, like you've said, NSF GOLI, and other programs like PFI, Tech Transfer, and PFI AIR. But when these activities are not looked favorably in a young faculty's tenure profile, it works very well for established faculty members. So how can we encourage, and what is the support that NSF could provide to these younger faculty members who are in engineering, where their basic research is mostly related to product development and innovation? How can we incorporate the second mission of NSF, which is innovation, through broader impact, through your initiatives?
So as I understand your question, it has to do with institutional practices on tenure and promotion. Is that right?
Yes. And
Yeah.
Yes, it's an institutional issue and institutional policy, but if there are other mechanisms or any other mechanisms for younger faculty for product development and innovation from NSF, especially from the engineering directorate.
So the one special program we have for junior faculty is the career program. and the career program encourages integration of research and teaching. So to the extent I can imagine a junior faculty member as he or she is developing their long-term career plan, they should be thinking about how their research and its broader impact can be brought into the classroom or outside the classroom in educational activities. And I think that would, I imagine, be looked very favorably upon by the departmental structures. The larger question is really institutional. I mean, I think the situation across the country is evolving, in many places evolving quite rapidly. So in many institutions now, they ask you on patents or industrial outreach and connections as part of your tenure portfolio. This is, academic institutions tend to be somewhat conservative. I've been a chair, I've been a dean. In many of these cases, the problem is us. It's us as peers when we sit around and vote on colleagues' promotions and tenure. Are we being open-minded? Are we recognizing today's and tomorrow's reality? So a lot more effort has to go into that educational process and those discussions that need to take place before someone's case comes up for promotion and tenure. I think the departments and colleges and university bodies need to be thinking abstractly, what value are we going to place on efforts that are aligned with broader impacts, and are we giving proper credit to individuals who are making a big difference? Because it surely brings credit to the institution and credit to the individual and credit to science and engineering as an enterprise for nation's prosperity and well-being. So it's a complex question. I think there is some room for optimism on this as I see changes on many, many campuses.
I'll comment that at Wisconsin, we have integrated packages that have now become acceptable, and oftentimes it involves outreach, community engagement as part of the scientists going up for tenure. That is a huge change on our campus. Unfortunately, the faculty who was leading that effort took a deanship in Vermont, so she's leaving, so we've lost our advocate within the faculty for that. Questions?
Hi, I'm Sarah Kobilka from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I'm newer to the broader impact field, so when people were saying, as you know everything about this, I actually didn't, but that's okay. I've learned a lot. It's been absolutely wonderful. And from the perspective of an outsider who is new to this and still kind of figuring things out, the idea with the panels is to have scientists who are experts in the field to be judging the merit of what people are proposing. So isn't it, if broader impacts are supposed to be such a big part of it, shouldn't there be experts in broader impact who are on that panel to show the balance of, if we truly believe that that's such an important part of it, and it hasn't always been there, so the people who have been proposing in the past, some are really good at it. I'm not saying that there certainly are lots, especially in the area of working with grad students, that's what their experience is, but working with a science museum, working with a boys and girls club, some of those areas that they're not familiar with, is there a move to bring more experts like the people in this room onto those panels or as advisors in any way?
I think that's a good suggestion. I think we should do more of that. I think, like I said in my comments, the room for improvement is just stupendous. We can do so much more in educating the average PI, and there is no such person, on what can be done, which is well beyond routine, which can have huge impact if they paid attention to the expertise that is sitting in this room. So making it really easy, that's what I meant by facilitation. I mean, so on one hand, I see tremendous possibility for improvement if we just educate people on what can be done. And then on the other, as we evaluate proposals in those panels, to have the expertise which can assess the creativity of the proposed broader impacts as this kind of thinking becomes more institutional. But I think step one is simply to spread the knowledge, spread the expertise, spread the best practices, resources, like a lot of resources that David, you talked about, but I'm sure in this room, collectively, you can put together a wonderful list of resources that should be thought about when, and how to make it easy for the faculty members to really leverage all this stuff. So both on the, you are talking about the evaluation side, but I'm saying even on the creation side, we can do a lot more work than we have done so far.
Can I make a comment on that too? It's a really good question, and it's one we're asked quite frequently by panelists. I think the issue is, as Pramod also referred to, is one of how do we make this even across all panels and all PIs? Because often within a panel, you'll have one panelist who will give 30 seconds to broader impacts and another one that will talk about it for 20 minutes. And is that fair from the beginning, not only to the PI, but also to the whole concept of broader impacts? So I think beginning a network like this, where we can start to think about it, we've certainly discussed it within the Biological Sciences Directorate about how we might improve assessment of broader impacts and bringing in people that have that expertise whose job would be then, I presume, to look at 50, 60 proposals and their broader impacts. I think that will happen eventually, and it should happen eventually. Or some form of that. But I think it has to come from the community and the institutions that provide some evenness across the nation so we can have some standards against which we will work. So.
If there's no more questions, we're going to work. So think up some questions. Except we do have a lot of work to do.
Hi, Julie Rosian from Oregon State University. Thank you so much for being here and the panelists earlier. A lot of us are in the position of sort of selling broader impacts, and yes, NSF's really serious about this to our campus. So what do we say to the PI who says, I still get funded without it. I still get funded saying, I support a graduate student. I still get funded saying, my science is just really important to the world. What advice would you give us? How is that expected to change? Because I think on the ground, they're not seeing that the change is imminent.
I can take.
That's an interesting point. I think examples of that are decreasing as we become more and more serious about broader impacts. Of course, I don't visit every panel. I visit as many as I can, and my feeling is that there are very, very few of those instances. Even very well-established senior PIs who may be National Academy members and so forth still have to produce a good broader impacts package. So if it still is out there that there are some who can get away without doing that, I think that's on its way out. At least we hope so.
I would just add one comment to John's answer. I think what John said is really compelling. I would ask the following question. I mean, they have to write a broader impacts piece. Well, why not make it really wonderful? Just like you're very proud of the science. Your science is needed by the nation and by the world. Can we make your broader impacts equally impactful? So I would appeal to their sense of pride in their work and say, you are going to do this anyway. I mean, you're going to write something. Are you going to just forget about it after you're done writing? So I would appeal to that part of that individual psyche and see if it works. I don't know whether it will work or not, but you can try.
Perceived risk in doing that sometimes. How will the panel see it? Will they see I'm putting too much attention or budget towards that? So I think that it's good that the examples are reducing, and maybe it just will take a while for PIs who maybe are only submitting every couple years to see an effect.
Another psychological approach, perhaps, my friend Debbie Rowe, who's a great community organizer, is all about giving people awards for the little steps that they make, and then maybe it's shaming them into feeling like they need to do more to justify the award. So whatever it is that they've done that you think fits with broader impacts, recognize them. Have some sort of an article or a publication coming out from your university media saying, so-and-so gave a talk or whatever else. But seriously, to give them positive feedback for whatever little steps they take.
This is Sriram Sundarajan from Iowa State. I would like to echo my thanks. We really appreciate your insight into your thoughts about broader impacts. So you mentioned that it's this community and it's our peers who need to drive this change. Could you talk a little bit about how that might look like as a process? What are the mechanisms by which we can try to achieve that or move that along? And the second part of my question was, could you talk a little bit about how you perhaps address or try to ensure kind of uniformity across the different panels within your directorate in assessment? Thank you.
So I'll take a crack, and I'm sure John might has his own take on this. I think the change is happening, and it will happen in at least 3 different places. First is inside NSF. So we constantly have conversations about broader impacts criterion with the program directors. So when we have our all hands meeting or when we meet as divisions, we talk about what is it that we are doing, what is it that we are seeing when they bring panels in, and how is this being evaluated. And there is quite a bit of variation from panel to panel, from program officer to program officer. But as we have more and more conversation and pick up on best practices, how to do fairly, like John said, how to make it more even so that we are not penalizing some institutions and rewarding others unfairly. So I think there's going to be that piece of change that's happening inside NSF. The other change that will happen is as panelists come and do their panel work, and they're reviewing, say, 30 proposals, and they see, these 3 have some really creative, broader impacts, and they've got institutional strategies that they are leveraging and are able to articulate what they're doing and having such a wonderful story. They will go back to their institutions and ask, why aren't we doing this? I mean, why aren't these resources available at my campus where, I saw these 5 proposals that did just a fantastic job because they had the institutional strategy, leveraging the kinds of things that we talked about. So I think that would be another piece of change. And the third piece of change, I think, can be brought about by people like you at your institutions by holding meetings with current and potential NSF principal investigators and talking to them in general settings about how to think about broader impacts. What are the resources you are able to bring to the table? What are the strategies, the insights, connections that you're able to bring to the table? And educating those groups on a regular basis, every 6 months, every 4 months. I don't know, I don't want to be too prescriptive, but I can imagine holding workshops where you bring success models, you bring resources, you show them, what can be done, and then have sort of open discussions about how those faculty members see their work coupling into this much larger framework, and then the visions for what can happen. I think that's the thing we need to constantly talk about is what might we be able to do if we were to do this together, rather than you sit in your office, write your proposal, you got great science, so I'm going to get funded anyway, don't bother me. Get them out of that mode into saying, what might we accomplish together if we were to work on this seriously with the rest of the national community? So I think that's how this change is going to happen.
I think Pramod's right on there. I agree with everything he said. I think it's probably useful every now and then to remind everybody that we get our money from Congress. Public outreach is ultimately outreach to Congress. And by and large, I think they do understand that basic research is a driver of the economy and creates jobs and so forth. But it is, as Pramod said, and you have also articulated much more than that. And I think expanding the use of, even if it's just a broadening a broader impacts office at institutions that helps at least coordinate faculty broader impacts within an institution and then beyond in some sort of network will go a long way to helping us here at NSF with panels actually do a better job of assessing broader impacts, because they're incredibly diverse. I mean, broadening participation is very deeply embedded in broader impacts. But then you got PIs like Nalini Nagkani, who's working with prisoners, incredible outreach program, and others who are working on environmental issues and bringing together citizen science, hundreds, maybe thousands of members of the public at large, and others working on education. So how do we compare those? How do we assess them? What are the criteria for saying these are excellent broader impacts or they could do better? That's something we've been talking about with panels and we've been talking about within the foundation as well. But as Pramod said, we can't really do it unless we have help from you. So I'll stop.
Susan Carter from University of California, Merced, and I just wanted to follow up on your comment. I love the idea of going back and doing the workshops, and I'm in research development. We already do quite a bit of that now. But one challenge we face in doing that, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is the challenge that they don't want to hear it from us because we're not the National Science Foundation. They want to hear it from you, and that's really where it's most effective. And travel becomes an issue, particularly for those of us on the West Coast. So I know you know this, but the restrictions in the past that have been there around travel have really hindered some of our efforts at my institution and others. And I'm hoping that I'm starting to see some changes there. I'm hoping that there will be further changes that the directorates will really take to heart the importance of being out there in the community in addition to the community being here. And Dr. Wingfield, when you get back to Davis, I hope you'll consider a regional workshop, including Merced, since we're only 2 hours away, of course. Yeah. But that needs to be taken to heart, that is one of the challenges that we face.
Yeah, I mean, I think travel has been a big problem for the foundation, as you know. There is one interesting thing about travel, is the IPA travel is not as restricted as the travel for permanent staff. So if you were to approach people who are on IPA appointments, you might have easier time attracting them to on travel, just because the restrictions are not as severe for them as they are for. I personally have gone, every talk I have given at every university, I talk about broader impacts. I have 3 slides on broader impacts, and I'm going to enrich them after this conversation because I think you've given me a lot of good ideas on what I need to be saying. But I'm emphasizing this personally.
If I could just add that, go back to your statement that you're looking for input from us, for some leadership from us. This is, with the America Competes Act, the authorization, we are tasked with demonstrating to the public and to the Congress that the research that we fund does have relevance to people's lives, how it benefits society. So that's where broader impacts came from for the NSF, because other agencies like NIH, their broader impacts are quite clear in health, or USDA and agriculture. But for basic science, it's pretty nebulous. So broader impacts is our way of doing that. And so that has come from the top down, so to speak. But then to make it better and really move this forward, it has to be a dialogue between us and you. So again, I think the workshop mechanism may be a good one. And certainly the Research Coordination Network is a good way of doing that. I've been involved with RCNs before. They're just fantastic way to bring people together and bring NSF into.
By the way, Tom Peterson, your provost, knows everything about this.
Yeah.
I'd like to give you an opportunity for closing comments.
There
as
was
we're
a
going
question
to
there.
move on.
There was a question there.
Susan.
Good morning. I just want to add, I'm a program officer in DEB, and we have just reviewed 505 pre-proposals within our spring panels, and we asked about intellectual merit and broader impacts for all 505 of them. And so they are really being considered, and I just wanted to share that. And if you have faculty that question that, you should have them email their program officers and say, I would like to serve on a panel, because we are trying to bring in young faculty. We are trying to get diverse faculty into our panels who don't have the experience, so that they can learn about a pre-proposal process, the full proposals, as well as the emphasis we're putting on broader impacts in addition to intellectual merit. So I just wanted to add that point.
Good point.
Hi, I'm Heidi Ilmendorf from Georgetown University. So I had a question about the budgeting for all of this, because I have faculty who are very enthusiastic, but the budgets are rather small, and so they ask what I can do with 1% or 2%, which is, you know, $1,000, $2,000 a year, and the answer is obviously not much. So I just keep hearing different numbers for what broader impact should constitute in terms of the budget, and I'm looking for some advice for what to tell faculty.
That's an excellent question. It's one we're getting more and more, and I think we all agree entirely. It all comes down to resources, and in an ideal world where we had a little bit more leeway, we could do a lot more. But I think nonetheless, having said that, at a time when we're probably in the deepest and broadest valley of decreasing funding that we've been for a long while, or ever, I think you'll find program officers, division directors, and so forth are really trying to balance portfolios in many ways, and balancing the actual research and education components and broader impacts is really tough. But again, I think that's something that should be a topic of a workshop. I think it's a very important point that if you're going to do good broader impacts, you need some resources to do that. There's no question about it, and we have to address that issue.
Hi, Jory Weintraub from the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center at Duke University. One question I get a lot from faculty reflects the fact that there's sort of a spectrum of potential broader impacts projects or initiatives, from the effective but fairly safe types of things like research opportunities for high school students, or developing new curriculum and with good ways of implementing it. And then on the other end of the spectrum are the more sort of high risk, high reward types of things, the wow factor, the things that people have never done before but really are flashy. And I don't really have a good answer for this question, but I've been asked many times, where in that spectrum should you try to place your ideas? How do you know what's more fundable versus too risky?
I think, again, that reflects where the peer community is on this issue. So you're kind of, trying to guess as to what the panel is going to view as really worthwhile doing. I would ask us to think a little differently. Imagine it's 2024. 10 years have passed from this workshop, and we ask ourselves, has the broader impact of NSF-funded research changed significantly in the last 10 years compared to what it was before? And I think the only way we have any reasonable hope of answering that question is to have some measurements that actually demonstrate that. I think at a single PI level, there is simply no hope of making measurements that are credible. That's where I go to this whole idea of institutional, regional, whatever, much, much larger communities and bodies that can actually make efforts and show that the needle has actually moved. And that's where the coupling, so now going back to your question, I would ask that faculty member, as he or she sees options, which one aligns the best with other much larger forces at work, which are probably institutional or regional or societal, align those things, show that he or she is making a really creative contribution to that much larger force, go 5-10 years out, hopefully we'll be able to measure and say, you know, that institutional strategy actually had a demonstrable impact by moving the needle on one or the other priority. So I think that's how we need together as a community to think along these lines for us to have much larger impacts. Otherwise, it will remain, something that we checked the box, filled the form, did the thing, and we are doing our great scientific research.
Yeah, well, one thing I just add to that, and again, I agree with Pramod entirely, is that one thing I hear from panelists and so forth is, these broader impacts are absolutely fantastic, but this is a full-time job. So where are they on that continuum? And I think if you have, institutional broader impacts office that's coordinating these kinds of things, it would help the faculty tremendously to do a lot more and be more effective with broader impacts at the same time doing their great research.
Just a quick follow-up. I think, Kemi Jonah from Northwestern University Office of STEM Education Partnerships, I think the message around the institutional office is on board, and I think your answer to the alignment, the vector sum, I think, was a brilliant analogy. However, there's an intrinsic conflict because on the one hand, that's incredibly sensible, logical, budget-wise, but we have these tensions. So we have a tension between that and the idea of novel, broader impacts, which of course is kind of vacuous because we're already struggling with just basic broader impacts, and then we're asking them to be transformative, and on the science side, which is certainly understandable, and on the broader impact side. So you have this tension there, and then there's the tension between that sort of novelty and impact and the 1% to 2% budget allocation, which you just heard about as well. So I think there's a lot of lip service and conflicting messages, but then in the trenches, it's hard to reconcile these things.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think it does tie up a lot of questions that have already come up. Imagine the following future. Let's say Northwestern puts out at the institutional level their broader impact strategy. You say, we are Northwestern, this is where we are, these are the things that we deem really important for our community, and these are our 5 broader impacts, initiatives or strategies, and this is the gap. This is from where we are to where we want to be, these are the gaps. If you show that, and suppose it's sort of publicly available, and I can certainly imagine Northwestern can easily do something like this. Now when the PI writes his or her proposal and shows how their proposed effort creatively fits into this larger frame and complements everything else that's going on, I think the case becomes a lot easier to accept. I think the only problem, and I already kind of alluded to this in my commentary, is that how do we make it such that it doesn't become just routine check the box exercise. I think that's where some work needs to happen so that it doesn't come across as, I lifted 3 paragraphs from Northwestern's strategic plan and I just inserted them in my paragraph. If that happens, I think people will see through it. So I would not say it's so much novelty as creativity and leveraging, the fit to somehow it has to connect to the research that's being proposed, right? So it cannot be completely divorced from the fundamental research that's being proposed. I think having some successful examples of this would go a long way, right? I mean, if you showed, here are 5 really interesting ways in which the broader impact piece in a proposal fit into this larger frame, it gives people a way to think. So I would just encourage us to, but I think your point is very well taken about the inherent conflict between novelty and we are struggling with the basics. In case of engineering education issues of diversity, this has been around for 30 years. But just because problem is old doesn't mean that we can't have new solutions, new creative solutions. In fact, we probably need new creative solutions to old problems.
Thank you.
Last chance for comments to wrap up.
I guess maybe it's because of where I come from intellectually and practically, but I reject the idea that this is an either-or question. I think that if broader impacts is framed both intellectually and practically as either or, we will not succeed in achieving broader impacts. And I think that there are ways that we've all talked about at this meeting that the broader impacts can really be integrated into any kind of a project. The diversity of the teams that you assemble to do the research, looking at what are the societal applications and implications, using intellectual crowdsourcing to broaden the people who are giving you feedback on your research beyond just some, the 3 disciplinary specialists in the world who study your particular thing. Connecting with partners. And I think also we've had examples from NSF that budgetarily it's not a zero-sum either. Maybe it is within a particular proposal, but there are things like I-Corps that will add money to be connecting with technology. Almost any proposal that is funded can go to a program officer and ask for a supplement and generally get it if you want to be adding especially if you're adding a diverse student from an underrepresented population onto your research team. So I think that we need to be thinking about this as an additive and increasing the whole pie, not a slicing of a shrinking pie.
Okay. So I think it's true to say that we are on the same page in many respects concerning broader impacts, that we have to demonstrate to the taxpaying public and to Congress that what we do is really innovation, and we are contributing to society in many different ways. I think where there are still huge issues and gaps here is exactly how we go about this, funding for it. If we're going to do the best broader impacts, and as you say, it costs money. Everything costs money these days. And how are we going to move this forward in a coordinated way that really shows the public at large and Congress that basic research such as shrimp on a treadmill that you've all heard about is actually does have a contribution to make. And there are many other examples of proposals across the foundation that have been dinged in various ways that are actually making very substantial contributions. That comes down to broader impacts, and that comes down, the onus eventually comes back to us, that we need to do a better job in letting the public know and educating them, broadening participation, so many different levels in which we do this. But how we coordinate it in the future, I think, is obviously the challenge, and I think we're on board with that too.
So I don't have a whole lot of new things to add to what I've already said. I think this meeting is really important. I think the thinking that's going on in this room is really important. I hope this is the beginning of a significant change on broader impacts, and the opportunity is very attractive. I think what we could do together is absolutely fantastic, and I would wish us all the best in you and us, because we are in it together, like John said. We are in this together. Together, I think we can really make a big difference, and I would encourage us to keep being very optimistic and work towards it. And thank you for inviting us to this meeting.
Yes, thank you.